we're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new style, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's March 25th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Arirang.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Happy Monday. And Park Ki-hoon.
Glad to be here.
Good morning. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, has revealed that she has been diagnosed with cancer and is undergoing chemotherapy. In a video message on Friday, the Princess of Wales addressed weeks of speculation about her whereabouts and health after she was hospitalized in January. Middleton did not reveal what type of cancer she had and said her diagnosis came as a shock. She asked for some space and privacy during her treatment. Kate is the mother of three, with Prince William, the eldest son of King Charles and heir to the British throne. Her three kids, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, are respectively 10, 8, and 5 years old. It's not the first time the royal family has battled with cancer. Recently, King Charles was diagnosed with cancer in February, less than 18 months after his mother, Queen Elizabeth, died in September 2022. Moving on, the South Korean occult movie Exuma has attracted 10 million moviegoers as of Sunday. The movie achieved this feat just 32 days into its release. This is the first K-movie to sell over 10 million tickets since the historical fiction movie 12/12 The Day, which reached this milestone on Christmas Eve last year. Exuma, starring actors Choi Min-sik and Kim Go-eun, is about two shamans, a feng shui expert, and a mortician who work together to find out what's causing a string of mysterious events happening to a wealthy family. They exhume the grave of the family's ancestor in a remote Korean village, hence the title Exuma. And recently, online posts have gone viral for explaining how more hotels, swimming pools, and health clubs in Korea are banning people with tattoos. These so-called no-tattoo zones prohibit people with tattoos from entering premises or using services, mainly because they're thought to be threatening or offensive to others who look at them. More businesses are incorporating no-tattoo zones, citing Article 3 of Korea's Misdemeanor Offenses Act. Section 19 of this law punishes anyone who offends or unintentionally threatens anyone with tattoos. And we're seeing more no-tattoo zones in hotels, kids' cafes, and health clubs, which is spurring debate as whether this is a violation to one's freedom of expression. Here in South Korea, tattoos can only legally be done by medical doctors. Although the law is rarely enforced, violators can face fines of up to around $14,000. But it is estimated that over 13 million Koreans, or about 1 in 4, have at least one tattoo. Now, here in the studio, what do you guys think about this growing controversy as to whether allowing more no-tattoo zones, is it the right way to go, or is it a violation of one's right to freedom of expression?
Well, one thing for sure is that I know us three, we don't have a tattoo, but Walter does. So 1 in 4 obviously have tattoos here in Korea.
That matches up,
So
yeah.
Bringing him into the conversation.
But I think it's, at the same time, a little inappropriate to see like more no tattoo zones here in Korea. Even though South Korea is becoming a more developed country, trying to accept, diversification, I still think we're a very conservative country in this matter. I think before that, it's just the first step we should take is to reform the law of legalizing tattooing to real tattoo artists, because right now, like you said, only doctors with medical license are legally allowed to practice tattooing, but almost close to zero doctors are actually, practicing this kind of tattooing to other people. So I think now that we're seeing more people with tattoos, we should be a bit more accepting and not discriminate against those kind of people with what choices they've made. And I think the more we do this, we'll see more retaliation in terms of violence from people with tattoos, even though they don't have the intention of, making other people kind of, scared or uncomfortable. If we keep enforcing these kind of things to them, I think they will kind of show these kind of actions.
Right. As long as it's happening, we should face reality and try to really navigate better ways to control or regulate that. What are your thoughts on this?
I think this is a very interesting discussion, and speaking purely from one of the three, or one of the four, I guess 3 out of the 4 that don't have tattoos. I did feel a bit comfortable when on variety shows, celebrities would cover up their big and lavish tattoos, not because I'm against against it, but I felt like it showed respect to people who might not be for it. So I was quite curious about the matter, so I researched a bit. But actually, according to the news videos and news articles, a lot of the public were actually for no tattoo zones, and a lot of the reasons were because of their kids. They didn't want their kids to be exposed to something that might be too aggressive or too inappropriate. Now, speaking purely from the perspective of freedom, I have friends and colleagues who have tattoos, so I think it's completely up to their own to make these choices. But if we apply the same logic, I would say, isn't it also up to the freedom of these shop owners to decide if something feels harmful or inappropriate for their own private business?
Right.
So in anything, I think this matter shouldn't grow bigger than what it actually is, rather than just respecting the freedom of choice of either parties, in my opinion.
I think that's a very valid point, but here in Korea, whenever we see like no kid zones, sometimes even no foreigner zones or no tattoo zones, it always spurs the controversy of whether it's infringing someone's right to anything, whether it be freedom of expression or access to a certain premise. And I do think we need better regulations and discussions going forward. Now, in the meantime, we're going to switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day. Today, we're going to be looking at a booming lifestyle found among our generation. It's called being a freeter, a term combining the words free and arbeiter, or a part-time worker. And this moniker first trended in Japan, but now we're seeing a growing number of young people in their 20s and 30s leave their stable full-time job to work part-time for a minimal income. Now, Cheska, are there any stats backing this statement up?
So I was actually quite curious too, because I don't know if you guys have heard of this term, but this is the first time that I actually came across it. So I researched a bit, and it actually is for people under 34 who make a living through part-time jobs only. And this is different from the freelancers in that these jobs have a very fixed hourly rate or have a minimum wage, and usually are part-time jobs, so they don't have as much job security as other full-time jobs. And this term was actually coined back in the late 80s and is coming back again. So according to 인천일보, the number of part-timers have steadily increased in the past 5 years, and about 70% of Korean adults that were surveyed were positive about making a living as freeter. Now, I was also curious too about how the MZers, or why they chose to do so. So now let's take a look at the screen to see how our generation thinks about being a freeter. So when asked what the benefits were, the overwhelming reason, almost half of it, was freedom. Now, the freedom to live the way they want to, I think, is a big characteristic of our generation. And about 20% responded that they didn't have to engage in work environment or the general society. And as we know, when you work in corporates, even the time outside of work is also the life of socializing and networking. So I guess being able to kind of not have that when you work part-time, I think was the huge benefit. And one of the things I noticed upon looking at the stats was the fact that unlike the 80s freeter, who had no choice but to probably resort to part-time jobs because of high unemployment, I think modern-day freeters, including our generation, kind of voluntarily choose to become freeters for multiple reasons. Yeah.
And I think we're going to be expounding on the reasons, but if I just may add on in advance, I think it has to do with freedom, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Our generation seems to be really prioritizing this keyword as we're going about from the traditional, conventional ways of having to go to a prestigious university and then looking out for a stable job. Instead, I feel like our generation is navigating different parts of their lives and respecting different individuals for that, right?
Absolutely. Just to back what Cheska and you said, over the past 5 years, the number of part-timers here in South Korea increased to 20%. That's a big, big increase, backing up, again, the increasing number of freeters. And ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, I think many people were actually forced out of their full-time jobs, and they had to spend a lot of time at home without a job. So we, as being the digital age, growing up in the digital age, we thought of new ways, new conventional, innovative ways to not work and make money, not physically being at an office with the traditional 9 to 6 working hours. So, and along with that, I think they realize unless you work for a really big company, the salary you're going to get paid is not going to be enough to make you either save up or invest for a future, for a prosperous life.
That's true.
So I think it became like a natural socioeconomic behavior for a lot of youngsters to either study more to get into the big companies, or just like you said, like we said, we're talking about become a freeter and just have different types of kind of daily part-time jobs to just make ends meet on a daily basis.
Right.
So if in summation of both of your opinions, I do think that it could come of choice, but also the socioeconomic background, whether it be COVID-19 or the different economic situation we're living in, has pushed a lot of millennials and Gen Z to seek out part-time jobs and become freeters. But what type of part-time jobs are people from our generation taking these days?
You know, speaking of, I think jobs also have a trend, right? In the previous generation, our parents' generation, I think the highly esteemed or sought after job was obviously the licensed professionals, what we call in Korea the ones with 차, and tenured jobs, you know, whether it's teachers or even public servants, where job security was very, very solid. But nowadays, and very generally speaking, I think there are two main sectors for the sake of our discussion today. One is the so-called independents, the digital nomads, the creators, and even the startups who create their kind of own community and own collective, and they create their own time and own work. And the other, which we're discussing today, the freeters, who work for part-time jobs at convenience stores or delivery, and then use the rest of the hours for themselves. And I saw some of the vlogs and the videos that these people have posted up, and they're usually in their 20s, 30s, and sometimes even a bit older, who voluntarily left their corporate or full-time jobs to pursue this lifestyle. And some people actually take on about 3 different part-time jobs and make just as much as they did when they were working at a corporate job.
I mean, kudos to them. I think that takes a lot of diligence as well.
It really does. So his schedule was like morning delivery and then convenience store and then like a cafe. So it was like a full-time work. Yeah.
Living a life of
갓생. Exactly. As we mentioned in our previous episode, that's like living like a god, using your time efficiently. Now, Keen, what other jobs are young freeters trying to take?
So I think, before mentioning that, the attitude towards work has definitely changed among the younger generation to the older generation. We youngsters actually leave big conglomerates for many reasons. Whether we want to take a longer break, seek different types of jobs, or even start our own business, just like what Cheska mentioned. I think young people put more emphasis on work-life balance and just enjoying the time outside work and trying to find more value in their individual time. So I guess it's not all about work. It's about what you do outside work, like your hobbies, things you want to try, like traveling and so on. So I think even though money does play a big role to us as well, but I think we're not afraid to escape the traditional working style and just hop around different jobs, trying different types of jobs until we actually find the one that really satisfies us. Yeah.
Which explains why the concept of staying at one company or occupation seems long gone. Then what are some unique traits of young freeters these days?
And as you mentioned, and exactly that phrase, I think is a huge shift from in Korean 평생 직장, which literally translates into one company for life. And I think most of our parents, especially our fathers, generally have probably a minimum of about a decade of work experience in like one solid company. But now the transition seems to become the norm, and freeters do not prioritize status, class, or even money and fame, and of course stability in some cases. I think they focus on the present moment and try to live the fullest within their own fulfillment and satisfaction. And another thing that Ki-hoon also mentioned, I think, is the freedom to make their own social engagement. So when you work at a company, you are forced to network or spend time with people because it is a community. And there are obviously benefits to it, but some people find it to be very difficult. When you work part-time jobs, when you leave the place, you're done for the day. So I think that's also a huge draw that kind of got these youngsters
because you're achieving short-term intermittent goals on a daily basis. Now, what are your thoughts on that?
I also think the overall economic situation influences people's preference and, of course, working styles. Like big companies nowadays are not hiring as much, trainers and, of course, new employees. So in turn, it's creating more competition. And so even though some people are choosing out of their own will to take on like different part-time jobs, I think most of them are kind of forced to choose a different career path because they cannot get into the corporate they wanted to, and why? Because they've studied so much for that job, they might not be able to get it. So they kind of,
and they don't want to deal with the stress.
Exactly. So they have to choose a different type of job, even if they don't want to.
Quite ironic, though, even though the socioeconomic situation has pushed them to make that decision, I guess compared to the older generation, because we're living in better financial times, I do think we have that liberty and that privilege, I guess,
agree.
to know and get what we want. Now, before we end this part of the discussion, I have to ask, do you guys want to be freeters one day then?
What do you think, looking at
I mean, I would like to know your answer.
I probably couldn't. And at this point, I don't think it's a matter of do I want it, do I not want it. I don't think I'm cut out for it. And in uni, like in college, I've had those times when I was like part-time, like English tutor, and I was actually making a pretty good, decent like living. But I was so worried about the future. I was anxious about where the trajectory of my life would be. So I think for me, I like to know that the steps that I'm taking is eventually leading up to something.
I see. What about you, Gi-hun?
I think I'm just kind of in the middle right now, being a freelancer. I'm just happy with what I'm doing. I do have like diverse, different types of jobs that I'm doing right now, so I'm not quite sure yet.
Yeah, because a freeter and freelancer, as we mentioned in the very beginning of the discussion, is a little different. A freelancer, while you have your own expertise and professionalism there, not to say that freeters don't, it's more of intermittent, short, part-time jobs with minimal wage. Now, we're going to switch gears to ask our viewers if they ever wanted to live like a freeter. So take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to share with us. Starting with Leon said, the freeter, free arbiter style can be a good option for some, especially those who value flexibility and exploration. However, it's important to be aware of the challenges and have a plan for financial security and career development. Benny says, I think I cannot be a freeter. The reason is when I'm a student, I can't really do the things that the normal workers do yet until I get my real work. Perhaps for me, I can really help by earning money when I can work. User said probably many youths will feel less of a burden in getting a job and changing their job if this trend prevails. Now, to better read into why more people from our generation is choosing this freeter lifestyle, we're going to include an economics professor in our talks. We're now going to turn to Professor Shim Myung-gyu from Yonsei University. Professor Shim is an associate professor of economics who will help us better understand why a growing number of people from our generation want to live a freeter life. Welcome, Professor Shim.
Good morning.
All right, so we've been talking about it in the studio, but we would like an expert's analysis as to why we're seeing more young people quit their stable full-time jobs and instead go part-time.
I can think of 2 main factors behind the scene. The first factor is the belief among the young workers that even when their jobs are stable, they cannot follow their parent generation's lifestyle who could purchase their houses by accumulating their labor income. And both workloads and working hours are still significantly high for stable jobs in Korea, implying that there should be enough compensations to attract workers to have full-time jobs. And I think this is not the case in Korea anymore compared to the past, especially with wage stagnation compared to asset price hikes. And so it lowers incentives of young workers to stay in their full-time jobs. Second factor is the income effect. Theories in labor economics predict that high income level generate incentives for workers to work less because they value leisure more than before. And given that overall income level has increased in Korea over the last several decades, including minimum wages, I think the income effect has been reinforced a lot. And even part-time jobs are paying much higher than before. And given that compensations for stable jobs are not that great anymore, I think desire to find work-leisure balance is quite a natural consequence.
Professor, in the studio, we have seen some of the reasons that our generation have chosen to become a freeter lifestyle. But what may be some drawbacks to a prolonged freeter lifestyle trend?
I can suggest 3 drawbacks, 1 at the individual level and 2 at the aggregate level. The first drawback is that a worker does not have enough asset holding with this kind of lifestyle. While part-time jobs are paying more than before, as I suggested, absolute wage level is not that high to allow them to save a lot. And this is okay when the state of the economy is not that bad. But when the economy enters a severe recession, as we had several years ago, it creates a problem because such workers do not have enough asset holding to insure them against the negative income shock. Secondly, because of the first factor, the government needs to pay a lot when the economy is hit by the negative shock to support the living costs of the workers. And this might increase the financial burden of the government because the labor income tax becomes lower when there are more freeters, but the government should pay more during the recession. And as a last drawback, I can think of human capital accumulation. The human capital will not be that accumulated enough because it seems that the freeters switch their jobs more frequently than the workers with their full-time jobs, preventing them to accumulate enough human capital. And this can lower the growth potential of Korea, which is already a serious problem.
Right, Professor. And why don't we move on to the very last question, Kyun?
Yeah, we are a little pressed in time, Professor, but are you for or against seeing more freer youth? And for a better economy, what type of solutions should be in effect?
Well, I'm not against freeter youth because they can choose their lifestyles as they want. But I think policymakers need to find out a solution to keep a balance between the traditional labor market, where we have a lot of full-time jobs, and the new lifestyle, the freeter style labor market structure. And this is based on my discussion on the negative effects of the new lifestyle on the aggregate economy, because it can harm the economy both in the short run and in the long run. And also, what I think is that this new lifestyle is reinforced as a result of the dual labor market structure and slow economic growth in Korea, rather than young workers just prefer such a lifestyle. And so if the firms and the government can introduce policy measures to attract workers to have full-time jobs, I think this trend might be reversed if we want. And what I can think is the flex
measures in the
time.
infrastructure then. Due to time, Professor, we'll have to hear you up till here, but thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and as the professor mentioned, I do think it's up to better infrastructure to see whether this trend will continue or not. But what do you guys think? I think it has to do with our unique traits as millennials and Gen Z of wanting to label ourselves as a freeter or not.
Right.
Do you think this type of trend will continue?
You know, I quite agree with Professor Shim that it depends heavily on the economy. When the economy is good, obviously we do have these freedom of choices. And the current status quo, our previous generation has made it stable enough that we can have these choices. However, I think one of the things that we definitely need is more social, like security,
Right.
in terms of what would happen if we take a hit on the economy. How would these part-time jobs be surviving?
Exactly. What about you, Kyun?
We'll obviously have to wait and see how this kind of working trend will change over time. But like what the professor mentioned, economy is definitely very important. It plays a big factor, but also the government needs to provide, come up with better, not just high-paying jobs, but high-quality jobs that will attract more young
very
people. And because we already know, in the long run, Korea is going to suffer from labor shortage, and this is another issue that we need to tackle from now so that we have a better future moving forward.
Exactly, and as we've mentioned so many times on News Gen, our generation is prioritizing happiness and personal life over just a set stable income, and hopefully companies are well aware of that and make sure that their infrastructure is on par with our demands. Now, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dain-hong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And Park Ki-hoon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.